of the North Vietnamese offensive
in central Bosnia.
War is an undying, dark element of human nature. Since the dawn of mankind, there has always been some form of combat between warring parties. So often in war we hear about the violence, the military, soldiers, and political disputes. But all too frequently we forget about those who truly suffer the most from the military conflict, the innocent civilians. It is the civilians who lose their homes, who are subject to abuse and abduction, who are deprived of basic resources, and most evidently, who are defenseless from such attacks. The ability to survive in a war zone is truly a treacherous task, one which requires strategy, grit, and strength. Every day could be the last, and carrying that horrifying reality around with you showcases war's true evil. Because of how much war impacts individuals, societies are forever changed once military combat takes place. The survivors of war are left with deep battle scars, thus newly acquired survivalist mentalities must be set in place after such violent deprivation. A House in the Sky highlights the suffering people face in a war-torn environment, and how both individuals and society are permanently altered from experiencing such violence. Amanda Lindhout, a Canadian freelance journalist, was abducted while reporting in Somalia in 2008. For 460 days, she was subjected to every form of torture one could imagine, including starvation, rape, and mutilation. However, hope kept Amanda alive during her adversity. She created a mental refuge where she could transport herself back to Canada, to the life and comfort of her home and family, a place free from violence, abuse, and hatred. Her House in the Sky. Amanda has been free for many years, yet her horrific ordeals in Somalia will forever haunt her. To get a better understanding of war's impact on civilian demographics, it is essential to examine the brutal methods of inflicting pain against innocents in war zones, the political motivations for combat, the degradation of mental health amongst civilians, and the newly acquired mindset of hope necessary to survive. Syria's ongoing war has become the world's most infamous conflict, primarily due to the horrendous human rights abuses which take place on a daily basis. The methods of warfare used in Syria come with a human cost, which has obliterated the status of human rights and safety amongst Syrian civilians. Deciphering which political parties are responsible for specific attacks has become increasingly difficult, since very few reliable journalists travel to Syria, thus weakening Western knowledge of the incidents taking place. However, a major atrocity plaguing Syria today is the use of chemical weapons against civilians. There have been a number of chemical weapon attacks in Syria throughout the past few years, which have cost the lives of hundreds of people. Although the international community has full knowledge of such attacks, little is being done to protect the people of Syria. ISIS has been using innocent civilians as leverage for political negotiation, and insurgent groups have been reported to use people as human shields. Similar to the people of Syria, Amanda Lindhout experienced major human rights abuses from her captors, who themselves are products of violent warfare. During her time in captivity, her value as a person was completely diminished, since she was being used as a human bargaining chip by terrorists. Because she was no longer valued as a person, these insurgents felt as though they could justify abusing Amanda, while waiting for her ransom payment. A very similar pattern of warfare is used against the people of Syria, creating horrific, yet familiar humanitarian catastrophes. Wars which use innocent civilians as leverage are the most evil conflicts, and Syria is a prime example of such fighting. For decades, Afghanistan has been infamous for horrific wars, political insurgency, and grave human rights abuses. The country has not known peace since the Soviet invasion in the late 70s, and finding resolution to Afghanistan's ongoing conflict seems nowhere in sight. To truly understand why the war has left the nation in a state of total disrepair, It is essential to understand the politics behind the conflict and how these disputes have greatly affected Afghan society. Afghan culture is extremely conservative and dogmatic, and the fundamentals of communism and Islam cannot coexist. With the socialist government repressing religious influence throughout the 20th century, many Muslims felt that their religious identity was being threatened. As a result, an Islamic Mujahideen was created to fend off secularism. The Afghan government sought out help from the Soviet Union to quench insurgency, and Moscow agreed to send support. However, the Soviets overthrew the Afghan president, replacing him with leader Babrak Karmal. It was this act, the deposition of a leader by a foreign regime, that threw gasoline on Afghanistan's fire, occurring full-blown warfare. The Islamic insurgents were furious by this forced transition of power and fought back aggressively, demanding the withdrawal of Soviet troops. However, the insurgent demands were declined by Moscow, and the Soviets continued to destroy many Afghan municipalities in order to eliminate Mujahideen influence. Eventually, the Soviets did pull out. However, their violent efforts have left Afghanistan's physical and social infrastructure in a state of total disrepair. Because Afghanistan's political system was ravaged and never properly rebuilt, developing the country following the Soviet withdrawal has been an exceptionally difficult task. Because fighting has gone on for so long, many settlements are routinely destroyed, creating fear and vulnerability amongst the helpless Afghan population. Amanda Lindau visited Afghanistan in the mid-2000s, where she traveled as both a tourist and a freelance journalist. Upon arriving in Kabul, Afghanistan's capital, Amanda acutely depicts the war-torn municipality. It was a beautiful, wrecked city. Armored military vehicles crawled like reptiles through the streets, alongside tottering donkey carts and bicyclists. Amputees from the Russian war in the 1980s begged in the markets. Women walked the streets in cloaked burqas, looking like giant badminton birdies or floating blue ghosts. Afghanistan showcases how much society is damaged by war, and how a lack of a governmental structure disables societal recovery. The Bosnian War brought about some of the worst fighting in the 20th century, and civilians bore the brunt of this brutal conflict. Due to ethnic cleansing, families were torn apart, with many individuals witnessing combat, carnage, and murder at a dangerously close range. These traumatizing events left a major impact on Bosnia's civilian population, which can be showcased best through the minds of the children of Bosnia and Herzegovina. A nationwide survey conducted by Richard Goldberg found that approximately 94% of children exhibited symptoms of PTSD. The fact that over 9 in 10 children experienced severe mental health disorders following the war truly showcased the damage military combat does to civilian demographics, leaving a lasting legacy on the war-torn society. The experiences of Bosnian children parallel Amanda Lindau's mental degradation as her time spent in a war zone extends. Because of her direct contact with abuse and violence, she is left with severe PTSD. Following her release from Somalia, she had to spend months in intensive therapy to overcome her experiences, and still undergoes triggering flashbacks on a sporadic basis. Comparing the Bosnia of today to the Bosnia of the 90s, major social and political improvements have been made. The country now functions on a diplomatic level, and tourism has become a booming industry. However, some repercussions still hold Bosnia back from fully redeveloping. Landmines remain a serious issue for the country, instilling an undying sense of fear amongst Bosnia's population. Ethnic divisions are still a major issue, with some schools educating pupils of specified ethnicities. Bosnia's journey to peace has not been an easy one, but, just like Amanda's Lindau strive for sanity, it will take more time to heal such deep wounds. The civil war in Somalia has plagued the nation for over 2 decades, and the status of human rights among Somali citizens has degraded drastically since the fighting began. Because of Somalia's long-lasting conflict, the societal infrastructure of the nation has changed immensely. As a highly conservative and patriarchal society, the role of men in the household and community has always been considered superior to that of the women's. However, once the war broke out, many men joined vigilante militias or were killed. With the mass exodus of men from family life, the women of Somalia had to reshape their roles in society, taking on the task of providing for both the home as well as the clergy. Somalia, The Untold Story, The War Through the Eyes of Somali Women, written by Judith Gardner, showcases the bravery and resilience of the women in Somalia. Through recording personal testimonies of Somali women, the one experience they all have in common relates to their newly acquired mindset, one which affirms that they are capable of being strong, self-reliant, and independent. This quote from a Somali woman illustrates the mental readjustments brought about from war. After that day, I decided to rely only on myself, and not any man. The Civil War taught me that a woman can live on her own. The women of Somalia reveal that living through war is an onerous task, and creating a self-reliant and determined mindset is essential for survival. Amanda Lindau truly embodies the courageous and adaptable mentality of a Somali woman. A House in the Sky revolves around Amanda's constant strive for a mental peace amidst the chaos of her life as a hostage. If not for her creation of a psychological refuge, she could never have survived her 460 days of hell. Amanda firmly believes that our souls are responsible for keeping us alive amidst pandemonium, stating, "I think it's the human spirit inside of us all that has an enormous capacity to survive. War is the ultimate test of our inner strength, and those who survive it have the strongest minds and hearts." Just as many Somali women have learned that they can survive without a man in their lives, Amanda has found that strength comes from within, and that surviving trauma is possible, as long as one remains firmly hopeful for a brighter future. War presents the greatest evils to humankind. However, out of such suffering comes the brightest hope. It is universally found that optimism is the driving force behind survival. There are millions of innocent people who live in war zones on a daily basis. Hope is keeping them grounded, allowing them to appreciate the positive moments in their lives. Amanda's story is one of millions that has already taken place, is currently taking place, and will take place again in the future. Although war and tragedy will continue throughout human history, individuals can overcome the suffering as long as they remember to create their own house in the sky.